Hiring for your small business? If you're not looking for professionals on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. That's like looking for your car keys in a fish tank. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't even visit other leading job sites. So start looking in the right place. With LinkedIn, you can hire professionals like a professional. Post your free job on linkedin.com/spoken today.
Wow.
Nice.
Yeah.
What you're hearing are the sounds of people everywhere putting on Bombas socks, underwear, and T-shirts made from absurdly soft materials that feel like plush clouds. Yeah, that plush. And the best part? For every item you purchase, Bombas donates another to someone facing homelessness.
Bombas. Big comfort for everyone. Go to bombas.com/ACAST and use code ACAST for 20% off your first purchase. That's bombas.com/ACAST. Code ACAST.
There's never been a faster or easier way to start your weight loss journey than with PlushCare. PlushCare accepts most insurance plans and gives you online access to board-certified physicians who can prescribe FDA-approved weight loss medications like Wegovy and Zepbound for those who qualify. Take charge of your health and speak with a board-certified physician about a weight loss plan that's right for you. Get started today at plushcare.com/weight loss. That's plushcare.com/weight loss. plushcare.com/weight loss.
Hello and welcome to the Napoleonicist. It's day 9 of Waterloo Remembered, and I've got another treat lined up for you today as we're talking about the forgotten Waterloo and the role that museums and monuments play in shaping how people remember the battle. I'm joined by Marcus Cribb, the manager of Apsley House, the famous residence of the Duke of Wellington in London, and by Robert Pocock, who runs the Campaigns and Culture Tour Company, which specialises in Napoleonic War battlefield tours. Gents, it's great to have you on. How are you both?
Hello, very well, thank you.
Yep, likewise. Thank you, Zach.
Tell us a little bit about what you both do and your connections with the Napoleonic era.
I've been sort of fascinated by the Napoleonic Wars since I was a kid, and my teenage years were spent very much sort of reading every book that I could, developing a real interest, particularly in Waterloo, but also the peninsula. I loved the history, the geography, the great leaders, the great colour of the era, and I got to visit Waterloo about 20 years ago, it all came flooding back. It was a really moving few days for me. I was sort of walking the battlefield from dawn to dusk. The weather was appalling, but it really didn't matter. And at that point, I really thought I need to get in touch again with my earlier interests. So I set about sort of recollecting all the books that I got rid of. Kept going. I've got a huge collection of books, old maps, which are probably some of my favourite possessions. Old postcards, which show us the evolution of the battlefield since 1815, and that's really sort of formed the basis of my interest going forward.
And the thing that I really like about your company is that you focus particularly on the peninsula and particularly on Waterloo, but you are specifically a Napoleonic era, really dedicated, very detailed, very focused tour guide specialist for that era, aren't you?
I am, yeah. I'm something that I started doing when I rekindled my interest was going on a number of tours, and invariably I found myself going back a fortnight later on my own, because what I was told on tour just didn't make sense, didn't fit with the latest history. There were gaps. It didn't cover the perspective of all of the nationalities that participated. So I had real fun, if you like, sort of relearning the history, not taking the accepted history, but saying, does that make sense? And I think when you spend so much time on the battlefield as I have, I tend to be there 10 times a year or more. And a lot of those are my own sort of personal research trips. And you realise that a lot of the people who write the history actually can't ever have been there. Otherwise, they would never have written what they do. And unfortunately, the accepted history gets repeated. So I love to challenge history. I love to tackle the conclusions. I love to push the boundaries, dig out material from local historians. So there's a lot of history which is only just starting to get known in the English language, and so that's a huge opportunity to reinterpret our understanding of not just Waterloo but the whole campaign.
And if people want to find out a bit more about your tours, obviously I can imagine the corona crisis has just decimated all of your plans, but where can they find out more about what you're doing? Campainsandculture.com is my website, and I'm certainly 2020 has been rather washed out, but happily we were ahead of the curve. We saw this coming. We stopped people booking even when they wanted to, and so we're looking forward to 2021. I'd love to hear from anyone who would be interested in joining me in either Waterloo or the Peninsula. Yeah, I can't recommend it enough. And you're also on Twitter, aren't you?
I am. I've been a little quiet of late. I tend to have sort of fits and bursts, but yeah, what I love to do is to share images of the places that I've recently travelled to, and I can't stress enough. History is one thing, but these battles took place in really beautiful landscapes, and particularly in the peninsula, for instance. You can be up a mountain, you can be beside a lake. You tend to be in places that have hardly changed for 200 years, ancient bridges, and I love to share that. And of course, blue sky is always compelling, isn't it? So
it absolutely is. Marcus, I can't imagine you see a huge amount of blue.
No, I'm far more constrained within London. I either have my main office, which is the old porter's bedroom for the first Duke, or I'm down doing security monitoring. So I do get the added bonus of giving guided tours of Apsley, which less blue skies, more extravagant art and interiors.
Tell us a bit more about what you do.
So I'm really lucky that until this awful pandemic started, I am the manager of Apsley House, and it's quite an all-encompassing role. We're really unique that within English heritage, we've got the current Duke of Wellington, which hopefully everyone realises. Charles Wellesley, the 9th Duke, lives in the private apartments on the other side of the property. And so he's there, and then the rest of the house really is open as a museum. It's been a museum in one way or another since almost the end of the first Duke's time, where he put a small museum room to the side, and people could call and ask to see some of his collection, because it's absolutely vast. Over 5 dinner services, and I think something over 350 works of art, never mind the thousands of pieces of silverware that are there. And it's grown as well during the first Duke's time, from his private collection into art pieces that were gifted by various heads of state. Nearly every head of state Europe, including France, gifted fantastic pieces of art and military orders and decorations. His field marshal batons are particularly stunning, because they come from almost every Allied army, including Portugal and the armies in the direct campaign. But then you've also got like Austria as one of our allies. So they're all there, and it's one of the favourite parts of the job is to take round interested people, or people that maybe had no prior knowledge. It is interesting that quite a lot of people come with very little preconceptions, and some with almost next to no background knowledge, because the Napoleonic era is not covered in the main curriculum. I think in sixth form I covered AS level the French Revolution, and we got as far as some general coming back from Egypt and forcing a military coup. You might have heard of the Corsican, and that's basically where we stopped.
Napoleon or something?
Bonaparte, I think he was. And
something like that.
Something like that. He became quite famous, but we stopped there, and that's it. And then it was World War II, World War II, World War II, American foreign policy, and then World War II again. So I have to admit, I don't know when it's too early to mention Sharp, but obviously that interest spikes everyone's interest in the Napoleonic era, and love it or hate it, it's made a lot of people then start to research and read a bit more about what the truth is behind these books and these films that are so popular as well. And I have to admit, that's one of the interests for me, to go and have a job. That I was working in museums and running events and all sorts, and I wanted a career in museums, and it just so happens that I was already interested in the Duke of Wellington, so it's brilliant.
Match made in heaven. You're also on Twitter, aren't you? As is Apsley House. How can people? As is
Apsley House. Apsley House is on Twitter, and I'm at the minute doing my own independent reading and research, Cribb history, I think. And as you'll know, I'm working with Land of History to do some video series as well about all things Wellington. So Wellington Wednesdays and all things Wellington. Please, it's always nice to have interested people and a bit of debate. And I'm certainly learning a lot from it as people poke their heads up and say, hey, what about the King's German Legion? Hey, what about this small action that in northern Spain that's the British historians never talk about, or the sources are in Spanish? Can I send you some transcripts? So it's really interesting that there's this passion out there definitely from all generations. There's certainly some younger historians coming through, which is great.
It's a good starting point, really, because both of you talked about your own roles within educating the public about this period. And as you've just said, Marcus, that this isn't a period that features on the history curriculum, and I say that from experience as a former secondary school history teacher. And sometimes I talk to colleagues at university, and they'll turn around and they'll say, "But why are you looking at the Napoleonic Wars? Nobody's talking about that period. Napoleon's not even popular in France." And I mean, that's a bit of a generalization, we should say. but still, I mean, people they don't necessarily come to this period through an educational perspective. They come through it an entertainment perspective, whether it be through Sharp, going on tours, or through their private reading. And yet, when you look on social media, there is some pretty divisive, sometimes quite acrimonious, sometimes quite acrimonious discussion going on. So what's your sense about how people kind of engage with the Napoleonic Wars?
It does seem to be quite widely divided, that you either have those who've got so little background, and that's nothing against them. I think I agree that it's the education system, not to blame. It's just so much to cover that they are not covering this as well. But I've had people come, especially from the American tourist market, who I think one of my favourite things was a lady who she'd heard of Napoleon Bonaparte. She took a guess that he was married to Marie Antoinette and he was the King of France. And then she pointed out, so Waterloo Station, that I'm a bit confused. There's Waterloo Arch, and I'm there going, Wellington Arch. And she goes, so did the battle take place at Waterloo Station? And I'm just there kind of going, where do we roll back to? Because I don't have long enough to explain all the Ancien regime, the French Revolution, the early Napoleonic Wars, and just try to encapsulate that. And again, if you don't have that background knowledge in British school systems, then it does lead the pop culture, your master and commander, your sharps, your hornblowers, which, love them or hate them, I think they're doing a lot of good for the era as a research point, because they get people going, well, that's quite fun, that's quite interesting. Right, now I'm going to pick up a book.
Just sort of picking up on your point in France, a couple of years ago, I came across the most incredible exhibition of Napoleonic art in Arras in northern France. And it's a pretty nondescript town unless you happen to be into World War I tours. And there was the pick of the Versailles collection of Napoleonic art, most of it commissioned by Napoleon himself. And rather than showing it in Paris, they pulled it out of the archives where it hadn't been on show for decades, put it into Arras for a few months, and then to be put away, possibly never to be seen by the public again. So you're certainly right. There's a real embarrassment about Napoleon, which I think is a real shame. But I think for us Brits, I think one of the joys is that it isn't in the school curriculum. So it's one of those topics where we're not forced to learn it, we choose to learn it, and that's half the fun. When I was at school, so much history, and the books of the time was about General so-and-so moved this division here and that brigade there. And it could all be a bit dull. There was very little interpretation from first-hand accounts. And of course, nowadays, history is very much changed. It's led by the first-hand accounts. There's more and more available from all the nations, all the participants, which adds a real sort of flavour and colour to history, which for the Napoleonic era is sort of quite unique.
We're talking a lot about myth busting in these Waterloo Remembered interviews. For both of you, what is the most frustrating or the most common misconception about the battle you find yourself having to correct? Rob?
Well, I'm fortunate. I have a lot of pretty well-read guests on tour, and we have sort of good fun challenging their knowledge and expanding it. I think one of the biggest debates of recent years is the defeat of the French Imperial Guard. What route did they take up to the Allied Ridge? Which battalions were involved? Who exactly threw them back? Was it the First Guards? Was it the 52nd? Was it the Dutch Belgians of Chassé? We have great fun around that because, of course, the experience, even within the same regiment, varies an awful lot depending on whether you were standing in the centre of that line or at the end of the line. So that's great. There's the sequence of events on the battlefield, and the sort of cause and effect and blame, everything from the morning mud, Napoleon's apparent ignorance of what was going on, the route of the Prussians to their arrival, and elsewhere in the campaign, there seems to have been some real lack of knowledge, lack of coverage in the history books on what was happening on the flanks at Ligny, of D'Erlon's march along the Roman road. A lot of confusion and limited knowledge of what happened at Genappe. I think the most compelling thing that we do on our tour, we actually do on the very last day. And that is to take copies of the original maps that Grouchy and Napoleon had. And we divide our tour group into two teams. One is Napoleon, one is Grouchy. And Napoleon is there issuing his orders and instructions that we know and believe that he issued. And Grouchy is there issuing his very diligent reports back to Napoleon. By using a map, you find that a lot of the place names, actually, they appear twice in different places. You have villages with the same name. You have descriptions of areas that perhaps don't appear on the map at all because they're both using different maps. You have delays in the transmission of orders. You have the uncertainty as to whether they've been received. And I think that puts people really into the mindset of Napoleon and Grouchy, and they start to understand the realities of warfare in the time and the genuine difficulties that people had. Marcus, what about you?
So essentially coming to it from almost a post-Waterloo era, and something I see online a lot, which is Blucher saved Wellington. And I think it's almost, I know it's such a big question, but there seems to be this understanding, and as a sweeping generalization, it does seem to often come from younger French generations where they've had a bit more of the imperial glory in their education, it seems to be. And it seems to be this almost this understanding that Blücher had just happened upon Wellington's army and his flank in the afternoon of the 18th of June, not realizing that obviously it was a preconceived plan that Wellington was going to hold the Ridge of Mont Saint Jean. Blücher was going to come to his aid. And I think that's so important that they seem to be, no, it's two separate armies doing their own separate things. No, there was a grand plan. And it was largely under the Duke's mind, but obviously Blücher plays a huge part. And I think it's that delicate balance of definitely not downplaying the Prussians, in fact, giving them their due, but not also saying that the Prussians won Waterloo. It was an Allied victory, in my humble opinion, of these armies coming together. And I think it's very important that we say Wellington didn't just hold a ridge and sit there and wait for Napoleon to attack him. There was a reason behind this, and that's sometimes just lost. And that's a myth that needs to be busted, that Wellington just wasn't waiting for something to happen. He was relying upon the grand plan.
Absolutely. I mean, Blücher himself wanted to call it the Battle of La Belle Alliance, didn't he? In part because there is an inn called La Belle Alliance, for those who haven't been there, on the battlefield.
But yes, the Belle Alliance, I'd agree that you've got the farmhouse, Napoleon's forward headquarters, but it was an Allied victory. So you've got the Anglo-Allied army of the Army of Occupation under Wellington and the Prussians coming together. Also including that you've got Grouchy's and the Battle at Wavre and Napoleon's. But I also think it then also pays tribute to the fact that Wellington's army, which is often written down as being a British army, or actually era appropriate, it would actually say an English army, is so multinational, with so many German states in there, that Brunswick, Hanover, Nassau, the Belgians, the Dutch troops, but also within that the Scottish, Welsh, and especially the Irish, as we know, they made up a huge percentage of the contingent of even the English regiments. So I think La Belle Alliance is a great name for the battle, but unfortunately our Anglo-Saxon tongues in Britain probably couldn't get our mouth around it, and it certainly wouldn't make a good name for a train station in London.
No, it wouldn't, would it? But I mean, as you said, the whole reason that Waterloo was fought at Mont Saint, the reason that there is a Battle of Waterloo is because of that connection, that trust and that commitment on both sides. Because otherwise Wellington would have not stood and fought at Waterloo if he knew that the Prussians weren't coming.
That's it. He chose the ground. We think he'd seen the ground about 6 months previously. We also think recently that he probably read it in the Duke of Marlborough's diary, saying that the ridge was the best defensive point between France and Brussels. But he'd spotted that and given orders before that his army was to fall back there, knowing that he would only actually be successful if the Prussians came. It wasn't a tactic just to stand there and hold off Napoleon. So I think it's really important to tell the story of the wider picture as well.
And in many senses, and we're touching on this now, there seem to be sort of two Waterloos. So there's that basic outline that people sort of think they know, and then there's the more complex reality. How do you tackle that on your tours, Rob?
With time. So the campaign, of course, sort of kicked off just over the border in France at Beaumont, and only took a few days and quite a few battles to play out. And it's a wonderfully concentrated period of time. But to do it justice, this year we were actually planning to do a 9-day tour, so far longer than the campaign ever took. And that's so that we can actually see where the French kicked off, where they launched their attack across the border, and sort of follow all of the battles, all of the routes. I particularly take pleasure in sort of sharing my research on the Prussian campaign. It's very interesting. If you look at British books on the subject, they invariably include a sort of map showing the route that the Prussians took to come from Wavre to Waterloo, and they used very, very thick lines for their arrows, really demonstrating that nobody's bothered to establish the precise route. Having identified this as an area where not enough attention had been paid in the past, through my sort of collection of old maps and spending days and weeks actually retracing different routes on foot, I reckon I've sort of pretty much battened down the couple of different routes that the Prussians took, and so it's a real pleasure for me to sort of share with people the route that Grouchy took, the route that the Prussians took, and actually also to take people to the point where the Prussians had a very good view of what Napoleon was up to on the 17th of June. They weren't fumbling in the dark, unlike the French. They had a very clear view of what was happening and what they would need to do in order to come together with Wellington again. And so that's something I take great pleasure in sharing with people.
I must admit, I tried to do a similar kind of thing in the car and got hopelessly lost until I landed, I'm not entirely sure how, in Vav, and just sort of thought I only had a couple of hours left before I had to get the train, and I just thought, you know what, I can't try and figure this out, it's going to have to wait another time.
Well, I always reckon it takes at least 3 visits to a battlefield before you can even start to understand it. And yeah, the best way of discovering is actually getting lost. It's something that I've done numerous times, and it's a great way of learning from your mistakes.
Absolutely. I must have driven past the mill at Biaget near Vav 3 or 4 times and just had to go. It's on a dual carriageway as well. So if you miss the turning, you've got to go back and come around again.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I had a lot of fun last year walking the battlefield with my father for over a week, and most days it was incredibly hot August summer, and carrying things in my backpack like the Mark Adkins like full Waterloo companion wrapped up, and then laying it out across fields and trying to point out that's where the brigades were, and actually the guides like that, because they're so comprehensive with the photographs, you can easily envision it, but and then also when you don't have the photographs and you're going off an 1815 era map, and it is interesting, and the Waterloo battlefield is incredibly walkable. So I'll say to anyone listening, if they haven't had the chance, it's only a few hours drive by ferry to go there and explore it, definitely.
We're talking about kind of walking the battlefields. You've done it multiple times, visited the monuments in the process. I mean, the first question I have to ask is, what's with the Victor Hugo monument? I know he devoted a significant part of Les Mis to the battle, but even so, why is it there?
Victor Hugo visited the battlefield twice, 1852 and 1861. In fact, it was at Waterloo where he finished his great work, Les Miserables. So he wasn't at the battle. He was a battlefield tourist, and he stayed at the Hotel des Colonnes, just north of Mont Saint-Jean. It's now the Jaguar Land Rover dealership at Waterloo, but that's where he stayed. And he wrote a great sort of screed of material within Les Miserables on Waterloo, and it's based on that actually a lot of the myths of Waterloo took hold. So the poor French cuirassiers sort of plunging into disaster. There is so much material in there which future historians have taken as fact and repeated, and it's such a shame. Yeah, we'll forever be trying to correct that. But after his death, there were lots of monuments were put up to him in various places, because rightly the French are very proud of him, and one of them happened to be at Waterloo, even though he had nothing to do with it.
I think one of his myths was the complete falsehood about the well at Hougoumont. As well, the British chucking French wounded down the well, which I think they excavated quite recently, and found a bit of a cow's hip, and there's no French bodies down there. And he's done a lot of harm. I believe I'm fair in saying he was part of the cult Napoleon, and so he came at it with a real biased angle.
Incidentally, Marcus, the monument opposite Victor Hugo's monument, which does have real meaning, to the Wounded Eagle.
The Wounded Eagle, yes.
Which is a beautiful monument.
Yeah, and that's supposedly on the site of the last stand of the Guard. Well, they've actually got the location wrong, but I've got the most wonderful postcard from 1904. When the grand opening occurred, and they laid on tram trips from Brussels. The people from Braine-l'Alleud, the neighbouring town, walked across the fields to the grand ceremony, and it was absolutely packed. There were flags and so on. But the wonderful bit to go with that is that whilst all the crowds were there at the opening of the unveiling of the Wounded Eagle, it was the day that recorded the highest number of thefts and break-ins in Braine-l'Alleud that they've ever known. So, so that's progress to the human race for you.
It sounds accurate for the aftermath of the 18th of June, with what happened to the poor wounded who lay on the battlefield. Still, not a lot changed. Yeah.
I should probably just say, before I get lynched by Victor Hugo fans, that I've got no issue with putting up a memorial to the guy. Can we just kind of clear that one up? And I quite like his work. I just don't see the reason for doing it at Waterloo. There is so much else to reflect on. The other odd one for me is the statue of Napoleon that's sort of at the foot of the Lion's Mound in the heart of the Allied position. To me, that just feels inappropriate, because you're standing at the spot where Dutch, Belgium and British troops died fighting him.
And that's where a lot of people said, also the Victor Hugo one, you can see it for miles. It's one of the tallest monuments, so it's almost a shame. But yes, it's when everyone was saying before you visit Waterloo that it had this huge bias, and it's still actually on the visit boards, is Napoleon's last battle, is what it says when you visit Waterloo, not the great defeat of Napoleon or the Duke of Wellington and Blucher were here. It's Napoleon's last, so there's this Napoleonic theme from a pro-Napoleonist angle throughout, and I think having him there kind of plays up to, I think, lazy history, lazy tourism. If the people are just going to visit one area of the battlefield, they visit the bottom of the Lion's Mound. The new museum is fantastic, by the way, and the layout is definitely far more balanced. It gives a good picture. But I think the statue there, which is between the museum and the restaurant, is I'd agree, very strangely put. If you were going to put anyone there, there's a wealth of Allied commanders that would be better suited.
And certainly the evolution of the landscape around that Lion Mound has been quite incredible. And when I take people up there, I actually like to talk about the history of the battlefield since 1815, because you've had a real sort of array of different buildings that have gone up, some have been replaced, some remain, but it's a fascinating insight into the way that sort of people have treated the history of Waterloo over time.
I believe that the Duke lamented when he saw the soil scraped away to build the Lion's Mound, something along the lines of, what have they done with my battlefield? Because it changed the topography of the land. It's not a steep ridge. It's not, I'm trying to think of Picasso, for example. It's not a steep defensible ridge. So yeah, it was quite subtle. And so to lower it even further is quite interesting.
Do you think the balance between the memorials is right in terms of remembering the different groups that were involved in the battle? Because for me, I just found myself constantly tripping over memorials to French units, French soldiers, episodes within the French side of the story. And there's nothing wrong with that. But then what I found on the British side of the ridge was, yes, some monuments, particularly to individuals, some to specific units, but nowhere near in the same kind of ratio to those that exist for the French.
I found that as well, and I found it quite interesting that there's not many memorials to individual units or regiments especially in the Allied side. The British do okay, especially around the two main farmhouses. There's a few near the Elm House Crossroads, including the 29th Inskling, where they died in square, unfortunately. And then you start to walk on, and I won't name the organisation, but there's a pro-Napoleon organisation that seems to have funded these. I'm not going to name it, I'll get lynched, definitely. And they seem to be paying, and nobody obviously objected. And so, yeah, it's basically skewed the balance quite a lot to having lots of French line regiment memorials just at individual places. And if you did that, I mean, the entire battlefield would look almost like a graveyard, wouldn't it, with small plaques everywhere rising out the grounds. So I think it's important that balance is right. You don't see enough to the Allied contingent of the Anglo-Allied army, in my opinion. They're definitely underrepresented outside of the Hanoverian and KGL, the King's German Legion. I don't remember seeing anything to Nassau and Brunswick, apart from the Duke's Brunswick own memorial. So, and there's nothing really to the Duke of Wellington on the Waterloo battlefield.
Yeah, and you've got a sort of collection of Hanoverian and sort of Belgian monuments around the crossroads, and but yeah, you're absolutely right. And a lot of that injustice was supposedly restored by the unveiling of the new monument, closing the door on war at Hougoumont. And I think reactions to that were quite varied back in 2015, because some people felt, well, it's trying to make a statement about peace rather than honouring the people who actually made a sacrifice on that day. But I think the overall experience, and there's no doubt about it, that the new underground memorial museum is a huge, vast improvement on what was there before. Yeah, I guess like any museum, you take out of it what you take out of it, and a lot of people will leave there not really knowing who won. And certainly I've witnessed that by overhearing other people sort of going around. And there's some magnificent parts of that, and yeah, the other public museums do a very good job of sort of filling the story in. The Wellington Museum at Waterloo, Napoleon's last HQ at Le Caillou, even the Ligny Museum to a certain extent. So I reckon it's possible to get a balanced view, but yeah, it certainly helps if you've read a few history books before you actually visit Waterloo.
And Marcus, what's your sense of the museums? Because as Rob's just said, there are a lot of museums that people can actually visit. Memorial 1815, obviously on the battlefield itself. Then you mentioned about Napoleon's overnight halt. You've got the inn where Wellington stayed, the one at Ligny. They engage with the history in quite different ways. What are your thoughts about that?
They do, and I think they're also you can almost date museums a bit like old films. They have an era about them, and one of those I love visiting museums. I mean, it's like a busman's holiday. I really enjoy it. And one of the ones is things like mannequins. Finding a mannequin in a museum that's trying to be like and fails in its real definition is certainly something of the 70s to the 1990s. And I really want to do praise to the kind of the underground memorial. I think it's brilliant. Museum there, because it's rather than mannequins, you've got these kind of like faceless features with the uniforms going up. I didn't notice this until the end. You turn around and there's a buzzard escaping its cage, which was a newspaper headline from Napoleon fleeing Elba. And it's really well done with a 3D videos, weapons, and it tells a story with an interactive element. And I think that's what, especially like the youth market today, are looking for, something really tactile, something they can play a game and they can see a lot more. But it's got the elements in there. It's got swords that have been granted to the Duke post-battle, and the history of the collection itself. So that's really quite a modern, hands-on, bringing history to life kind of collection. It's really well done. And then you've got kind of like a truer traditional museums where you've got especially the Wellington's headquarters and Napoleon's headquarters, which are very much, there's an audio guide, you read the panel, you see the mannequin, you see the room recreated, and they're really good at what they're trying to do, which is tell the story from the two perspectives of Wellington and Napoleon, and there. And it's wonderful that they are within the original buildings, which not many museums, when you go to, get that, especially 200 years ago. I think it's great that they've survived when so many other buildings haven't. And then Hougomont and Mont Saint Jean themselves have become museums. I mean, if anyone's listening and haven't been, they must go to Mont Saint Jean because it's now a brewery, fantastic beer. Completely unbiased in saying I'm not even a beer drinker, but it's delicious. And Hougomont, it's so poignant there with the new memorial, the few trees that remain, that filled with musket ball holes. It looks like they're riddled by the world's biggest woodworm. And then the memorials within it, it's really poignant. And they're all, actually, it's worth saying, if you're planning a visit next year, not with one of Robert's fantastic tours, then you can buy them all on one ticket. So it's also very well planned out. So the local tourist board are doing a very good job. I look forward to visiting again.
Absolutely, I think we all do.
And I think it's also worth saying that to do those museums justice, you need to spend a lot of time there. So the sort of people who think, well, I can do Waterloo in a day, are kidding themselves, really. So because for me the joy is to actually get out and about beyond the museums, and museums can themselves be they can lead people in the wrong direction, should we say. So I take the Ligny Museum. People go to the village of Ligny because it has a museum, and that is the name of the battle, which is supposedly Napoleon's last victory. Although Zach heard me speaking last year saying, well, actually, it wasn't really a victory at all. But because of the focus on the museum at Ligny, people go there. Of course, it's nothing like Ligny as it was back in 1815. There's only 1.5 farms still standing from the day. Everything else has changed. The road layout has changed. One of the prominent features of Ligny was the castle, which was destroyed. So, and Ligny is quite an expansive battlefield. And unfortunately, people visit Ligny and they think they've done Ligny. And actually, they need to spend a whole day covering and exploring the entire battlefield of Ligny to get a sort of true perspective of what really happened there.
On that note, actually, I found Quatre Bras quite hard to visit. So I was with my father, who couldn't cross the difficult terrain as easily, and also I don't want to go traipsing across farmers' crops. But you've got the memorials, and they're on different sides of what's quite a fast, busy road. Especially you've got the two cavalry memorials on one side and the Duke of Brunswick on the other. And I believe the barn that had witnessed the battle was torn down within living memory, I think about 6-8 years ago. Yeah. And it's now a petrol station. So it's a real shame that there's much less to see there. And I found the orientation of trying to see that much more difficult, whereas where the Lion Mound kind of helps, even though it's changed the topography, is it pinpoints an area of the battlefield. And from there, even someone who's not familiar with maps can start to orientate themselves. So if you just if you only had a day, which is definitely not enough, you can at least see the top of the battlefield and do a couple of museums. But yeah, I'd definitely say turn it into a long weekend, a week if you can.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not something to be rushed. And it's interesting what you say about Quatre Bras, because we should make the point that actually this is private farmland. A lot of the fields are now private land which you can't walk on, and you don't get chased off by a farmer armed with a shotgun or whatever. So do take care not to just kind of go wandering and trampling on somebody's crops when you do have the chance to visit. But Quatre Bras, it's almost a case of blink and you miss it, isn't it? There's certainly, yes, you've got the Duke of Brunswick Memorial, you've got a couple of other memorials there, but it's a quiet place. But then Waterloo is also a quiet place, except for the highway going in the middle. But it's a much more understated location. Is that your sense?
For Quatre Bras, yes.
Yeah.
It's much more understated. I can only think of, I think, 3 memorials that we stopped and visited. And there's a little car park turning in place between the two, like the cavalry memorials. There's no footpath leading down to the Duke of Brunswick's memorial, even though it's the largest memorial. You had to kind of make your own way by the side of this really busy highway, which I wouldn't encourage people unless they were, very, very safe in doing so. And in doing that, I didn't see anyone else visit. Whereas at Waterloo, you have the stereotypical coach trip, people being dropped off, shown it round for 2 to 3 hours, and then put back on, off they go to do another site, another probably not battlefield tourism. They're there to do a Belgian holiday, and they're off to see the chocolate factory or something lovely. But they wouldn't stop by Quatre Bras, which is a shame because it's part of this big picture of the build-up and the not just an English air inverted commas on podcast army. Is the Brunswick memorials there, and they're trying to meet up with the Prussians in layman's terms.
Yeah, I mean, it is worth wading through that sort of patch of nettles that you have to sort of walk through on the side of the road to get there. I was cut to shrivels by the end of it, but I mean, it's a very impressive memorial. But yeah, it's interesting that Quatre Bras doesn't really feature. People just kind of ignore it, and yet it was so pivotal to the Waterloo story, as was Ligny, perhaps more so than Quatre Bras.
Quite possibly. I was speaking recently with Josh from Adventures in Historyland, and he was saying if it was a World War I campaign, it would all be called Waterloo or Mont Saint-Jean. And, like the Battle of Mons was a series of small battles. And where the era history changes, we're almost lucky that we separate it. Wavre, Ligny, Quatre Bras, and the Mont Saint-Jean. But because of that, some get really overlooked. And I think that's a shame. So Quatre Bras, and it doesn't feature very strongly in the museums as much. I guess there's so much to cover. Which is, but it's such an important battle in the telling of what is such an important story.
Yeah, I would totally agree with everything that you say about Quatre Bras. It's difficult to get around. In certain places, it's dangerous to get around. There are a couple more memorials and places to see. And certainly over the years, I've established my sort of favourite way of doing it. But I think a lot of Quatre Bras is actually understanding the relatively modest undulations in the ground. So your direction of approach is very important. So, for instance, I like to take people to Quatre Bras following the route taken by the British Guards, by the cavalry and the horse artillery late in the day, so that they can see that approach. I like to follow Ney's approach up towards the battle, and then take a couple of different routes around it. And the high ground above the old Quatre Bras farmhouse, which, as you say, Marcus, has sadly gone now. But we've got a lot of British descriptions of what happened up there, and it's now housing, and it's not nearly as special as other parts of the campaign landscape are today. But it's certainly possible to to bring those aspects to life and to do so safely. But yeah, it's not the right place to spend a high proportion of the tour.
Do you think we mark Waterloo in the right way then? Because every year on the battle anniversary, reenactors descend on the battlefield, they recreate the famous events, and there's a fantastic buzz. But it's hard to imagine anyone doing that for the first day of the Somme or for D-Day. You know, you wouldn't get landing craft coming in and people storming the beaches of Normandy. Have we got the balance right between celebration and commemoration?
Well, for me, it's never about celebration because, frankly, tragic things happened in all of these battlefields. So, yeah, it's about commemoration. I think the way that I look at it is that if you visit a World War I battlefield now, there are cemeteries everywhere. It's very easy to become a tour of a series of cemeteries, and frankly, over the space of a few days, it's very easy to get dragged down by all that. There are quite a few uplifting cemeteries. In places like the American cemetery above Omaha Beach, World War II, and it's just incredibly beautiful, even though the crosses stretch as far as the eye can see. But I think in a way, Napoleonic history, because everyone was buried in mass graves or mass cremations, and very often those graves were dug up a few decades later and bones were crushed and used for fertilizer and sold around Europe. The landscape isn't now affected by those cemeteries. Our immediate thoughts aren't affected by those cemeteries. So I think it leaves us freer to actually enjoy the landscape, to look at the history in a very positive way, and in a sort of beautiful and breathtaking way that you can't necessarily do with some of the more modern campaigns of history.
It's so interesting. I think in short answer, no, we don't have the balance right. I was hoping to attend this year the reenactment, and I must give a shout out to the 3rd Battalion 95th Rifles Living History Society, and I was going out with them, and I can understand that there will be kind of celebrations of all these like-minded and effectively historians, normal jobs, coming together, and there is the farmhouse, which is a brewery, and all these people kind of coming together and meeting, and there's some jollities. But I know that there were commemorations planned for the 16th, the 18th, and also the next day during the reenactments, and that's something that I have to say I've seen really well done by living history reenactment societies for the era that they do normally hold a minute silence afterwards, and they are aware of it. But then, personal bias warning, it's too easy to celebrate, especially within British military culture. I think it's a terribly tragic series of events. Again, this is personal bias, but I see this as Napoleon's ego bringing him back. I just don't see what he was ever hoping to achieve. Peace was impossible, and victory incredibly unlikely. And because of that, on Battle of Waterloo itself, 50,000 wounded and killed just from that one battle. Add in Wavre, Ligny, and Quatre-Bras. It's really poignant. I wish it was something that was more in the national psyche, possibly because it's out of living memory, but we do feature it's within the front culture of our memory is the Somme, is D-Day, and to a lesser extent also Trafalgar. That's kept really well alive by the Royal Navy as a bookmark in history, whereas Waterloo, I think, kind of is far more overshadowed by World War I and World War II. And these men, it's not long out of our great-grandparents' generations, should be remembered that they were fighting for Europe's and Britain's freedom. And I think it's really important that we do that. I've seen some calls this year as there's going to be no reenactments, that people find a local graveyard or a plaque in a church, and maybe on the 18th of June go down and reflect for 2 minutes. I think that's a lovely thing, and if anyone can do that and find these things, then I think you should remember those relatively young men's sacrifice.
Absolutely, and that's one of the things that we're encouraging people to do, is to just take 2 minutes to celebrate. I mean, we're organising a memorial service, and you can find details of that up on the website. Rob, what for you should we be marking? Why does Waterloo matter to you?
So yeah, I'm really not one to set agendas for the way that sort of people should feel, and I think people get varying things out of their studies of battles, their visits to battlefields, and it's not for me to say how they should feel. But and some bring a massive knowledge, some bring very little knowledge, but a desire for learning, and I think it's very important that we don't forget the lessons of history. With a different career hat on a few years ago, I wrote a blog on the economic causes of the French Revolution, and it very much described all the mistakes that the advisors of the French royalty made, which led to the revolution, and how we're doing exactly the same thing in terms of our governments and our economics today. And this was sort of picked up by a think tank and went on to win global awards. The reality is that what I was saying came from an old history book, an old economic history book. I wasn't really making any dramatic new points. It's just that people had forgotten those things. And I think it's so important that we remember history. We try to understand history, and we're not hoodwinked by the fact that accepted history says such and such happened. I think it's always important to keep challenging, keep learning, keep an open mind.
And Marcus, what about you? Why does Waterloo matter for you personally?
It matters. I mean, I'm surprised that I found myself matters so personally. I do find that the era is so evocative. Everything from maybe I'm lucky and I feel like I have a bit of an insight into the life of Arthur Wellesley, and I found visiting places like Walmer Castle, where he sadly passed away in 1852, quite emotive, because there's this room laid out, very well done actually. But it matters as much, and I think, I don't want to say should, but it matters to me as much as the First World War. These are men of different backgrounds who are being told to fight for their nation's liberty and freedom against a possible foreign oppressor. And so you've got parallels there, certainly, with the politics of monarchies of 1914 to 1918, in my opinion, and other wars. And I think it's one of these battles that you can walk the battlefield. You can put yourself literally down. If you've got one of these maps, or you're doing one of Rob's tours, you can stand in these exact places. And the armies back then have definitely, because they were bigger, have got real regional routes. You can find a regiment that is part of your home county, or certainly an era nearby, and you can try to think of what it would have been like to stand and face a cavalry assault, or stand and see a cannonball coming for you, and you weren't allowed to do anything about it. I mean, the tactics at the time mean that you standing and facing like a real mincemeat of, and I think there's an element there of bravery and sacrifice, and that shouldn't be forgotten. And I especially despair when I see people chanting it online, especially Vive l'Empereur, and I just see the other side of it, especially young conscripts in Napoleon's army going forwards to be slaughtered, and then the men either doing the slaughtering or be killed themselves. It really is a bit of a tragedy. and luckily brought peace to our part of the world for quite a long time. So if there's going to be a celebration, it would be that we had relative peace in Britain, in Europe, for military threats, not social reforms, which are also equally fascinating, but for quite a while. So I think it's one that is a bit overlooked in Britain, maybe, and that's maybe why it matters so much, because anything we can do to try to remember the Napoleonic Wars, be it Waterloo, be it the Peninsula, be it the Eastern European campaigns, brings the history to life, but also brings the commemorations and the sacrifice to life, which is very important if they can't do it themselves.
Absolutely, and I think that's a lovely point to end with. Marcus, Rob, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me for this interview.
That was Marcus Cribb, manager of Apsley House, and Rob Pocock, manager of Campaigns and Culture Battlefield Tour Company, discussing Waterloo, the Forgotten Battle. You can follow Marcus on Twitter at mcribbhistory, and Apsley House is also on Twitter at Apsley House. Campaigns and Culture can be found at campainsand, or on the website www.campainsandculture.com. If you have any questions or comments, remember that you can get involved on Twitter using the hashtag WaterlooRemembered, or in the forum at thenapoleonicwars.net, where you'll find a specific room dedicated to Waterloo Remembered discussion. I'll be back tomorrow with a look at why Waterloo matters, but until then, I'm Zach White. This has been Waterloo Remembered from The Napoleonicist. Take care, my friends, stay safe, and as always, thank you for listening.
Hey, it's Paige DeSorbo from Giggly Squad. High quality fashion without the price tag. Say hello to Quince. I'm snagging high-end essentials like cozy cashmere sweaters, sleek leather jackets, fine jewelry, and so much more. With Quince being 50 to 80% less than similar brands. And they partner with factories that prioritize safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing. I love that. Luxury quality within reach. Go to quince.com/style to get free shipping and 365-day returns on your next order. Quince.com/style.